At the end of this media, you will be able to know about the closing control schematic of the circuit breaker. The figure shows the control scheme of a circuit breaker. J1 plus and J2 minus shown in the scheme are the supply lines from the battery. These supply lines are taken for different DC systems. A manual switch is provided at the battery output end to have a control over the supply output. There shall not be any fuse at the battery output point. This is because if that fuse blows out due to some problem, the whole DC system will fail. Thus, for each DC control circuit, a separate fuse is provided. The control scheme for breaker closing operation divides into two sections after the fuse of breaker closing circuit. One section is for local control at the breaker and other one is for remote operation at the control room. The dark point in the line indicates the position of the switch, that is remote or local, with a reference to the selected item of the selector switch. By selecting the mode using the switch, the supply can be given to K21 line for remote or to K23 line for local operation. Let us first take the remote closing of the breaker. After keeping the selector switch in remote position, the following conditions must be satisfied to close the breaker. The TNSC switch has many contacts for different purpose. One of the contacts of TNSC switch is taken for closing operation. That contact has to be closed. In the scheme between the TNSC switch and synchronization check relay, the line is indicated by K13 by M by C-1 by K18 by M by C-2. This means that the circuit scheme is similar to both the machines 1 and 2, but the wire numbers are different. In many places, this type of indication is given in the scheme. Synchronization check relay must be in picked up condition to close the contact 25x1. This relay picks up at the time of synchronization. Master trip relay must be in dropped out condition to keep 86M contact closed. Master trip relay is one type of lockout relay. Once it picked up due to fault, it can't reset itself automatically. This relay has to be reset manually. This can be cross-checked by going to sheet number 3 and check for 86M relay with contact number 115 and 125. The spring of the breaker must be in charged condition before closing the breaker. This is confirmed by the closed position of the limit switch Z22. The auxiliary contact 52B of the breaker must be in dropped out condition. If all the above conditions are satisfied, then the breaker closing coil 52C gets energized to close the breaker. Once the coil 52C gets energized, the breaker closes and the auxiliary contact 52B opens simultaneously. If the breaker trips again, only the contact 52B will close. Now let us move on to the local mode of closing breaker. After keeping the switch 43 in local position, the TNSC trip neutral close switch should be brought to closed position. Similar to remote mode, the limit switch and 52B should be in closed condition to energize the closing coil. As we discussed earlier, positive line J1 is now available to energize the closing coil as in remote mode to close the breaker. In both remote and local mode, anti-pumping relay coil parallel to closing coil circuit gets energized simultaneously with closing coil and open its contact 95-1. The purpose of this anti-pumping relay is to allow only one closing pulse to the closing coil. You know that the closing time of breaker ranges from 0.06 second to 0.1 second.
Assume if there is no anti-pumping relay. In local mode, there is a possibility of the person in service to hold on the TNSC switch in closed position for a long time, even after 52C got energized. If breaker got tripped immediately due to some fault and the person is holding TNSC in closed position, still there can be a wrong closing of breaker. Since there is no anti-pumping relay, the contact 95-1 of this relay will not be there, and thus through path for the current flow to energize the coil 52C is continuously available. Thus the breaker will again trip, and if it repeats, this leads to severe damage of the system. This process of multiple closing and opening of the breaker is known as chattering or pumping of breaker. Hence, it has to be prevented. So, once breaker is closed, relay 95 gets energized and opens its contact in the closing circuit and prevents chattering. Once the breaker is closed, the green indicator in the annunciator panel glows in the unit control board. If the breaker got tripped, a red indicator will glow in that panel. Thus, you have learnt about the closing control schematic of the breaker.